Okay, welcome to History 296, World History since 1945. Today's video is not going to be a lecture about content that we're covering in class. Instead, it's just going to be a short tutorial on how to put citations using Chicago-style footnotes into your rough draft for your paper and your final draft for your paper. And then also talk about how assignments that you've previously completed, like the prospectus and the annotated bibliography, can be used to build the rough draft of your research paper. Good news is a lot of you that have completed those two assignments, the prospectus and the annotated bibliography, already have a good portion of the paper that you've completed so far. It just needs to be arranged in the right order and do a little bit of writing and editing to make for smoother transitions between sections. And I'm going to break that down. But first, I want to start with talking about Chicago-style footnotes, okay? Now, what you need to know is that in your paper, you're going to place in-text citations using footnotes, which is really rather simple. If you can kind of see my screen here, you'll see this flashing cursor near a 1 in the text. And that is because that is the first time I'm citing a source. I'm paraphrasing material taken from the Waterloo Courier that talks about these two owners of a Chinese hand laundry in Iowa. And so when I want to cite that source, it's really rather simple. I simply go up, if I'm using Google Docs, into Insert. I scroll down until I reach Footnote, and then it creates a number in the text, okay? Starting with 1 as the very first source, and then a space down here below where I can enter the information needed to cite that source correctly. Now, if you've completed your annotated bibliography, then you already have the citation information that you need to place in that space. You simply can use your annotated bibliography and cut and paste that information into the source. So let's pretend here for a second that these two citations are part of my bibliography. I would come over to that. I would highlight that material that I want to cite from that source, okay? And I would copy it and then paste it into the footnote below. The only thing that you then need to add for a footnote is the page number where that material can be found. So if it's a quote, usually that's just one page. It might be page 1 or page 25 or whatever page I can find that quote on from that source. Now, if I'm paraphrasing material like I am up here, okay, I could be paraphrasing information that comes from many different pages in that source. And if those pages are consecutive, you'll see something like page 2, where the first part of that information is found, dash to page 4, okay? That's showing the reader that I'm paraphrasing, meaning I'm putting into my own words, information that is found in that source from pages 2 to 4. If it's not consecutive, like for instance, an author is writing intermittently about the Korean War and a larger section about war and communism in Asia, you might find the need to go 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, 6, and 8. All the times that information is mentioned in the source that you're paraphrasing. But the real important part that you need to remember here is that you don't have to do any kind of formatting with the numbers. For instance, if I delete that source, it disappears up here in the text, and then it should disappear down here in the space below where I'm citing that material. Okay? Just use ascending order, meaning the first footnote in your paper is number 1, and then every footnote after that adds to that number until you reach your final footnote, which could be like 10, 15, 20, whatever. You could cite something 30 times. Now, a common question that I get from students is, if I cite the same material, okay, do I have to again use that information again later? Like you'll see, oh, here I am quoting and citing Pat Connor again. Yes, you just keep adding that information over and over and over again each time that you use that source. When and how to cite, not something that by now you should have covered in college courses, but essentially in academic papers, you have to cite, meaning you have to create a footnote showing the source that you're using every time you're giving information that isn't common knowledge, meaning it's not just generally known, like that the earth is round, okay? A word of caution here. Basically, everything that you've learned about your topic is not common knowledge, especially because on a college campus, we all come from different cultures and different backgrounds. And so things that are commonly known about the past, well, that's difficult because many different cultures and class groups and gendered and racial groups see the past differently. They have their own interpretations. So don't treat much in your paper as common knowledge. Instead, recognize the fact that almost everything that you learned about your topic, you learned from some other source, and so give it credit. The other reason that this is good to use lots and lots of footnotes, okay, is because it shows the reader that you're working with lots and lots of evidence and that you're doing lots and lots of analysis, which is a long way of saying the more footnotes that you have, the more it appears that you've created and used lots of information from a wide variety of sources, meaning you've done your due diligence, you've done good work, okay? So creating those footnotes, if you get questions, let me know. Again, it's really rather simple. You're simply taking the citation information that you've already done from your bibliographies, copying it when it's used in the paper, and then pasting it into the space created at the bottom of the text, right? You create a footnote, it creates the space, you copy that information in, and then you add a page number where that information can be found in that source. This looks really rather simple, but I understand that my directions are not always clear, or there could be some kind of misunderstanding that you might have, or just something that wasn't covered in this tutorial and footnotes. So please send those questions my way, or feel free to call me or contact me through email. And then if you want to visit me during one of the Zoom sessions, that's perhaps easiest, because then we can share a screen and we can kind of look through those things together and I can help you. Okay. Then moving on, I want to spend the next couple of minutes and just talk about how to put your rough drafts together. And as I mentioned before, if you've done the prospectus and you've done the annotated bibliography, it's almost like you've written much of the start of your paper. The prospectus, that assignment that you completed for me that was just 3 paragraphs, really is in fact the introduction to your paper and should be used as such. Now, I do expect you to make edits and revisions to add or revise what you wrote based on the comments and feedback I gave you on the Canvas classroom for that assignment. Especially, it's so important for a lot of you that were missing a research question from that first paragraph to put that there to guide your reader, and also to give something to jump off to show your reader your thesis as you answer that question. But to start your rough drafts and your final drafts for your paper, you simply are going to recycle your prospectus. Now, following that, what should come next in your paper are the annotations you wrote about your secondary sources. Now here, I want you to make an additional revision beyond the feedback that I gave you from that assignment, and that is to put them in chronological order, meaning the first paragraph in the body of your paper should be about the very first secondary source that was published, the oldest one. So if you have books on the Korean War starting in the year 1975 and then running up to the present, the book written in 1975 is going to be the first one that you include in the body of your paper. And this will hopefully, through your summaries and analysis of those secondary sources, show us how the scholarship on your topic has evolved over time, how people have looked at this issue and event from the past in different ways and used different methods or different sources. And that will also help you to engage in a little more commentary and criticism of the scholarship, basically to analyze secondary sources by showing how they've changed over time. Now, once you've completed all those entries on your secondary sources, it's then time for you to try and use primary sources to create your own answer, your own thesis and argument to your research question from the prospectus. And that's where I want you to organize the primary sources and try and think about writing a main idea, basically a paragraph that starts with an answer to your research question. Just ask yourself, how does each source that I have for my primaries answer my research question? And then look for evidence, and that could be quotes, statistics, stories, that you can pull from that source as evidence to answer your question. And essentially, that's what you're doing over and over and over again. How you arrange your primary sources, whether that's chronologically from the oldest to the newest, or thematically, like if you have certain sources that go together because they were produced by the same person or the same media outlet or the same government. Or maybe there's a theme like state building or race or human rights that you think links together two sources. That's ultimately up to you. But what I do want you to do in the body of your paper is to first write on the secondary sources to show that you understand what people before you have done to study this topic. And then start trying to answer your own questions about that topic using primary sources. And hopefully, after you've done your analysis and written about those primary sources, you have some sense of what argument you make about this topic and how that differs from those secondary sources. And that's really where you should start your conclusion, okay? The conclusion section should start with a really easy template. And this is something that I call they say, I say. Basically, you rehash again what kind of an important one or two secondary sources say about your topic, kind of like you do in the second paragraph from your prospectus. And then show how that compares with what you say about that topic. Like, what is your argument now about the Korean War or the space race? And then kind of compare. Where do you agree with people? Where do you disagree? What kind of new ideas do you think you have, or new disagreements and debates that you think are important that maybe people have ignored or glossed over in the past? And then I want you to write a second paragraph. And sometimes this is the paragraph that gets people thinking about their topics in a new way and ultimately helps them create a much more nuanced thesis statement. And I want you to imagine for that paragraph as if I was going to give you $5,000. Imagine this has all been a proposal. And I basically said, I think you've got something important here to say about your topic, and I'm going to give you $5,000 in 1 year to continue this project. Ask yourself, what would you do next with this project if you had greater resources? It doesn't actually have to be $5,000 or a year. I just want to know, how would this project move forward if you were going to spend more time on it? Would you travel to archives, visit museums, find more secondary sources and new books? Would you interview survivors and participants in the events themselves, look for oral histories? Or would you talk like to experts, maybe historians or experts in other fields like psychologists, scientists, diplomats? Would you look for photographs and visual materials? If you had greater resources to this project, what would be the next step? And why do you think those would be the next steps? That's ultimately where I want you to end your paper. And sometimes that's where the easiest thesis comes from, is you just simply go, okay, this is what I've learned, and ultimately this is what I think would happen next if I would make this a much larger project, like a senior thesis or a dissertation, or just something that I was going to release on a podcast or a video to the general public to educate and inform them about my topic, okay? So that's how you put the prospectus, the annotated bibliography, and much of the research that you've done thus far in the semester into a rough and a final draft. This is the structure I want you to follow. If you have questions or concerns about that, or you want me to look over what you've written so far, give you more feedback on some of those things, please don't hesitate to ask. If you need extensions for assignments or having problem preparing for the exam, reach out to me, get in touch with me. I'll be around, and I'm always around even outside of those given hours to talk. Take care of yourselves and be well.